Hello friends, Normal Baggins here, and before we get into today's video, I just want to reveal that I have a face cam now. I've officially decided to add a video component to these videos. It's something I actually was planning to do as a reveal in a different video that I'm currently working on. However, some of the editing on that has been taking a little longer, so that's probably going to be a couple more weeks in the works, maybe another month or so. We'll see how things go. But we're here now, and I officially have a face cam, so no longer will you have to stare at a crudely constructed cartoon character that I created. You know, I came up with that on the fly in the last video, in the current video that I'm working on, and it sounded a lot, probably more organic and nice, but I like the alliteration there, so we're going to keep it in. Anyway, yeah, so instead of having to look at a poor PNG, you get to look at my face in probably low quality, depending on how well my camera decides to do today. So you're welcome, or I'm sorry. But anyway, so today's topic, I want to talk about the movie Conclave. Now, at the time of this recording, we are about a little over 1 week since the passing of the Holy Father, Pope Francis. So it's a bit of a confusing time both for the church and for the world. You know, there's an impending conclave coming in about another week from now. There's going to be a new pope elected. So, of course, what movie is more talked about than the 2024 movie Conclave, which came out at a very fortuitous time for them last year. There's been a lot of talk about this movie, both positive and negative. It's won a lot of awards. In the Catholic world, at least in the circles I move in, it's a very controversial movie, just based on the way that a lot of this stuff is portrayed. But, I figured a lot of people have talked about this, but I want to check this movie out for myself and see, as a Catholic, what do I think about this? Does this accurately portray our faith? Does it actually portray a conclave? Spoiler alert, no one quite knows how the conclave works because it's a bit secretive. So there is, of course, some artistic license that they kind of ran with there, and I think a lot of that's fair. But, what is this movie about? And I have a lot of thoughts, some positive, some negative, and we'll get all into that as we go. So to start off, I'm just going to give kind of a brief summary on kind of what this movie is about. So Conclave, as you can imagine, is a movie about a papal conclave. So at the beginning of this movie, the old pope dies. The former pope is not given a name in this, but the movie starts off on the deathbed of the pope. You have a bunch of the highest ranking cardinals kind of sitting around his bed, praying for him, sending him off. The main character that we follow is the dean of the College of Cardinals, Cardinal Fiennes, which, yes, I'm going to refer to him as that for the rest of this video, so get used to it. I think his name in the movie is actually like Lawrence or something like that. I don't really remember. So to me, he's Cardinal Fiennes. So Cardinal Fiennes is our main character. He is the dean of the College of Cardinals. So when a pope dies, there's a bunch of things that need to happen. One of them, of course, is getting ready to call the next conclave, and that responsibility falls to the dean of the College of Cardinals. He's kind of the top cardinal who oversees everything else that's going on there. So Cardinal Fiennes is in this position. He's in a very deeply troubled place, as we come to learn, just in his spiritual life and his personal life. He's been working in the Vatican for many years. He was a close friend of the former pope, but he actually wanted to leave his position and kind of just retire to a monastery. However, the former pope did not grant him this responsibility.
I asked for his permission to resign as dean, join an order.
What did he say?
He refused my resignation, said some were chosen to be shepherds and some to manage the farm. Apparently, I am a manager.
For those of you who know anything about some of the more recent Catholic history, that's very similar to kind of the situation that Pope Benedict XVI was in before he was elected. Cardinal Ratzinger, when he was the prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, so kind of the main teaching authority office of the church. He always really wanted to resign his position and just kind of go live the quiet life and write his books. He was a big theologian, loved writing. However, famously, Pope John Paul II always refused him because he always wanted him to be in that top position. He always wanted him close. He really respected his opinion. So he never let him resign. And then, of course, he became Pope eventually, Pope Benedict XVI. And, of course, then ended up resigning from that, and he was able to kind of retire to a bit of a quieter life. But anyway, getting back to the movie, I'm getting sidetracked already. There's a lot to go over here. So Cardinal Fiennes, he's in this very deeply troubled time. He wants to resign. He's having trouble with his faith in God. He's not sure if he believes anymore. He's having doubts. So he doesn't really feel like he's fit to be in this position, but the church law being what it is, he needs to now call a conclave. So there are several different candidates who, different cardinals who kind of quickly come out as kind of the front runners in this conclave, who the papabili, the papabile, the papabile. I'm not really sure how to pronounce that word. But basically the ones who are most likely to become pope, the front runners, if you will. It's not the same as a political race, but if that helps you understand it, so be it. So we have a couple of top contenders who kind of come out here. We have Cardinal Joseph Tremblay from Canada. He's very well liked. He's more of a moderate, but very popular cardinal. We also have Cardinal Joshua Adeyemi of Nigeria. He's more of a conservative African bishop, cardinal, who does have a lot of kind of grassroots support. We have Cardinal Stanley Tucci of America. Yes, he will also only be known as Stanley Tucci. I think his name's like Bellini or something like that, but to me, he is Cardinal Tucci. So Cardinal Tucci's from America. He is a liberal who's very reluctant. He does not want the position of Pope.
What if I know in my heart that I am not worthy?
You are more worthy than any of us.
I'm not.
Well, then tell your supporters not to vote for you. Pass the chalice.
However, he is willing to fill that space if, as his fellow liberals kind of rally around him and see him as a choice and also a good alternative to our final contender, Cardinal Goffredo Tedesco from Italy. Now, Tedesco, he's one of those big evil traditionalists. He wants the pre-Vatican II days back, and he likes Latin. So, he's a bad dude. So all these cardinals come to Rome. They all start coming together. Just before the cardinals are about to be sequestered, however, again, as part of the process, before the conclave starts, and then during the conclave, the cardinals are kind of kept secret just to stop any outside influence from getting in and kind of influencing their votes, right? This is something that's just between them and God, basically. That's the idea of the conclave. So just before they're about to go into the sequester period, Archbishop Janusz Wozniak comes forward to Cardinal Fiennes, and he's like, so just so you know, right before the Pope passed, he had a meeting with Cardinal Tremblay, right, the Canadian front runner for Pope, basically. And he doesn't know specifically what was going on, why this meeting was called, but one thing he's pretty sure about that he does know is that Cardinal Tremblay was actually asked to resign by the Pope. Now, of course, Cardinal Fiennes is very off put by this because he has no idea. He didn't hear anything about this. But this Polish cardinal is very insistent that no, Tremblay was asked to resign. So, of course, Ray Fiennes decides to go ask Cardinal Tremblay, what's up? Hey, look, I heard that you were asked to resign. Tremblay, of course, denies it. He's like, no, I'm not really sure what that's about. That's not what we were talking about in that meeting. We were talking about something else. And he even says, like, hey, check with this Monsignor who I know. He'll be able to verify that the Pope wasn't asking me to resign. So now all the cardinals together and the sequester actually officially begins. However, just before they're officially locked in, a new cardinal arrives that no one's ever heard of before.
In Lawrence. Initio.
Oh, dear God. One of them's died?
I'm sorry?
Have we lost a cardinal?
No, Your Eminence. We seem to have acquired one. I mean it literally. Another cardinal has just turned up.
The archbishop named Vincent Benitez, who's a Mexican archbishop who is currently serving as Archbishop of Kabul, which, as far as everyone knew up till this point, Kabul had no archbishop. With the Taliban there and all of the strife in the Middle East, that was one of the sees that has been vacant for some time. However, Cardinal Benitez has all the documentation that shows that he was made cardinal in pectore, right? So the in pectore is a Latin word. I believe it means like in the breast or something like that. Basically, it's something that the popes have done in the past, is that they make somebody a cardinal in secret. And, historically, this has happened, for reasons of we want to keep the cardinal's identity safe because it's in a very area with a high persecution. If somebody knew that this person was a cardinal, that would, of course, put their life in danger. So it's basically like a protective measure. However, the Pope needs to reveal that the cardinal has been created a cardinal if they're to be validly part of a conclave, right? So if the Pope dies, any cardinals that he made in pectore that nobody knows about, they are officially not a cardinal anymore. They cannot vote in the conclave. The movie doesn't talk about this. However, according to Wikipedia at least, the book actually did touch on this and said that the former Pope actually changed that law right before he died. So according, I guess, to the book, he's valid cardinal. According to the movie, he would not be a valid cardinal in this election, but he's here. He's a cardinal as far as this movie's concerned. Okay. So now they're all sequestered. They're all locked in. They're all having dinner with each other, kind of politicking. We see Tedesco kind of like talk to Cardinal Fiennes and kind of go into how we need to be super traditional again, and we need the Latin Mass back, and what's up with them French over there.
Frenchies.
And then all the liberal cardinals get together to kind of strategize on their own. So Cardinal Fiennes, Cardinal Tucci are both part of this more, quote, liberal wing of the church. The old pope was also a quote, liberal. And they all have decided that Cardinal Tucci is their man, right? He's one of them. He's probably the best one. He knows the Vatican inside out. He'd be the best candidate for pope. Cardinal Tucci doesn't really want it. He wants nothing to do with the papacy, which honestly, from what you hear from a lot of people in real life, a lot of cardinals, none of them want the papacy because that's a very taxing job. That's a very stressful thing to have all of Christ's flock, like the responsibility for all of that. So Cardinal Tucci doesn't want it. However, he can't stand Tedesco. He despises Tedesco. So he's willing to kind of step up to the plate and be their candidate. He basically says that he's pro everything Tedesco is against. We are never returning to that evil Latin. Large families, no more of that. No more stupid parents having, big, large families. We respect other faiths now. We tolerate other views in the church. And also women should have larger roles in the curia. Some of the other cardinals, that's a bridge too far for them.
Let's not mention women.
Why?
However, Tucci's clear that, look, no, this is what I stand. These are things that I want. And Tedesco hates this. So this is what we're going to do. Tell the cardinals this is what I'm for. Basically everything Tedesco doesn't like.
Then make sure that my message is clear. I stand for everything that Tedesco does not.
So day one of voting starts. By the end of the session, Adeyemi, who, as we mentioned, is Nigerian cardinal, he's currently in the lead with 21 votes. Tedesco has 18 votes. He's in second place. Next is Tucci with 17 votes. Tremblay has 16 votes. Cardinal Fiennes actually got 5 votes, which he was completely surprised about. And the Benitez actually ends up getting 1 vote. So nobody has the 2/3 majority just yet that's needed to elect a pope. So that means we'll have to go into another round of voting. So at the end of that day, Fiennes meets his right-hand man, who claims that he investigated the Tremblay, the claim about him needing to resign. The Monsignor corroborated Tremblay, saying that he didn't know what that was about. However, Ray doesn't really believe the Monsignor. Something seemed off about the discussion. So he's going to look into that a little more. Also, Benitez, they did a little investigation into Benitez just to see kind of what his story was. And makes a mention about some medical thing in Switzerland that Benitez was involved with. We're going to tuck that one away for later. That'll come into play a little later in our story.
That's a surprise tool that can help us later.
So day 2 of the conclave starts. There's still no consensus. No cardinal has yet to reach that mark. However, during the voting, there's a bit of a tremor that goes off. Everything starts shaking in Sistine Chapel. No one's sure what that's about, but they go on as normal. Later on, Cardinal Fiennes finds out that was actually a bomb that went off in the square.
And I take it something has happened.
There's been an explosion around in the Piazza Barberini.
A bomb?
It's unclear at the moment. There are injuries, but no talk of fatality, so...
You must say nothing to the cardinal electors about this, Ray. We are sequestered, and they must be shielded from all news that may influence their judgment. You understand?
Of course, Your Eminence.
So during lunch that day, there's a bit of a kerfuffle between Cardinal Adeyemi and one of the religious sisters. So he kind of storms off in a huff.
What happened?
And with that, it was back to the studio.
So Fiennes kind of goes to investigate and eventually gets the sister to reveal under the seal of confession. So makes it a bit complicated. However, he finds out that this sister actually had some sort of a sexual relationship with Adeyemi several decades before, which actually also resulted in fathering a child. So there's actually this cardinal actually has a child that child doesn't know about, that his father's a cardinal. However, the cardinal kind of gives him, looks after him and kind of sends some money his way. So Cardinal Fiennes confronts Adeyemi about this. And Adeyemi, of course, very tearfully admits that this is true. Of course, Cardinal Fiennes has completely broken the seal of confession and excommunicated himself from the church for this, but that's a minor issue we will address later. And of course, Adeyemi, even though that was kind of something from his past, they both realized that the optics of having a pope with any sort of sexual malfeasance in his past, that's just not going to be tenable. We're still recovering, of course, from the the horrific sex abuse scandals from way back when. So Adeyemi, he's basically finished, and he agrees to kind of give up his run for the papacy. So Tremblay's past and kind of what happened at that meeting still coming up. Eventually, Cardinal Fiennes realizes that he really needs to look into that. So Ray Fiennes talks to Sister Agnes, who's kind of in charge of all the religious sisters, and he basically gets her to kind of allow him to look on her computer, where he finds out that Tremblay was actually responsible for sending Sister Shinumi, that being the sister who Cardinal Ayemi had relations with. Cardinal Tremblay was actually responsible for bringing her to the Vatican. Cardinal Fiennes confronts Tremblay about this. However, Tremblay is like, no, the Pope asked me to bring her here. I don't know why, but I had nothing to do with that. Cardinal Fiennes doesn't think this is an adequate explanation, so he breaks into the papal apartments, which you're not supposed to do, and he finds documentation that Tremblay committed simony. That's the reason that he was asked to resign. Now, simony, for those of you who aren't familiar, comes from the Book of Acts of the Apostles, where I believe it's chapter 8 or 9, where there's a man named Simon Magus, Simon the magician, and he sees kind of Peter and the apostles, doing all these miracles, and he was like, hey, I want to do those miracles too. So basically he says, look, I'll give you money if you make me, you consecrate me to be able to do all of these miracles and stuff. And he's rebuked for that. However, throughout history from then, the term simony has come to be known basically trying to buying a religious office. So this happened a lot during the abuses of the Middle Ages, especially the Renaissance period. There was a lot of simony going around, but of course that's always been illegal and always been very frowned upon. It's a very, very huge sin. So Tremblay apparently committed this in that he's been paying off cardinals for the past year or so to vote for him in the conclave. So that's how he's gotten so many people to support him, is he's been paying them off. So Cardinal Fiennes goes to his buddy Tucci, Cardinal Tucci, and finds out that Tucci is also on the take, and has given up his bid and is kind of backing Tremblay now. And basically Tucci says, look,
accusing the Curia of institutional corruption.
I thought we were here to serve God, not the Curia.
Oh, don't be naive.
Cardinal Fiennes is not okay with this, though.
5 times I cast my vote for you, Aldo. But I was wrong. You lack the courage required to be Pope.
You who I call brother, how could you have come to hate me so? Is this what you wanted?
So on day 3, he gets Sister Agnes's help, and in the morning they basically copy and all of the documents. They copy them and basically create a copy for each of the cardinals who were there, and basically spread the truth about Tremblay and his misdeeds. So it basically comes to a head during breakfast that morning. All the cardinals are now finding out about that Tremblay's been paying everybody off, and basically his support evaporates right there. He tries to kind of, no, look, the Pope told me to bring the sister here, and I had nothing to do with this, but he's kind of done by this point. The people who are backing him realize that he's not going anywhere, so he's no longer a contender.
Judah, traditore.
So now we're down to Tedesco, and they need somebody else. So they decide that Cardinal Fiennes are going to rally around him. He doesn't want the position, but he'd be better than Tedesco. So during this latest round of voting, Cardinal Fiennes is about to cast a vote for himself. However, there's a big explosion. Everyone's kind of knocked off their feet. Some of the one of the windows blows out in the Sistine Chapel, and as they kind of collect themselves and figure out what was going on, it turns out that there's been another bombing, this time right there, right outside the Sistine Chapel. Several people have been killed, and this is one of several bombings that have now happened kind of across Europe. So I don't know if it's exactly said that this is specifically Islamic terrorism. However, when the cardinals kind of get together, Tedesco immediately jumps on that conclusion, says, we need to get a pope that's going to stop all these radical Muslims, and this is the fault of all you liberals and your cultural relativism. So we need to band together, drive these infidels out, and basically start a religious war against this extremism.
Noi abbiamo bisogno di un capo who fights these animals.
So of course, some cardinals are on board with that, some are not on board with that. Tucci kind of gets with a bit of an argument with him about that. However, they're all hushed because Cardinal Benitez, who for most of this process has kind of been keeping quiet, he's actually been supporting Cardinal Fiennes most of this time. he believes that he would be the best to be Pope. But now Cardinal Benitez stands up and kind of gives this speech, which has some good stuff, but also is a bit vague. He kind of gives this vague kind of call for peace, and that the real enemy is inside, and we shouldn't be so quick to kind of go after others and call them animals and all this stuff. So he gives this speech, and that seems to make all the cardinals kind of realize that no, he's our man. He's the one we need to elect Pope. He's the true proper candidate here. So there's another round of voting. Basically, everybody votes for Cardinal Benitez. So he is elected Pope. He takes the name Innocent as his papal name. And, while he's prepping to kind of go out, and there's this big announcement in St. Peter's Square where the new Pope is announced and his name is given, and then he kind of goes out and greets all the people. Right before he's about to vest up to go out there, Cardinal Fiennes, confronts him, just asks him, look, this medical stuff, it kind of keeps coming up, just like, what were you going to Switzerland for? What was the issue that you were trying to get investigated? I just need to know, you're about to become Pope. I want to know kind of if you have any issue, what that might be. If we're going to lose another Pope really soon, that's not something we want. So Benitez admits that the reason he was going to see medical attention in Switzerland is because when he was going for an appendix surgery, getting his appendix taken out at age 30, he had been a priest for many years at this point, he actually realized that he had a uterus, and he had basically, ovaries and uterus. So it turned out that he has this, very rare genetic condition that, he was born with the how should I put this gently? Born with what looked like male anatomy. However, interiorly, he had all the female reproductive anatomy. So he's kind of in this strange kind of, so he's actually a biological female, but he's been a priest. So what do we do with that? Apparently, when he found out about this, he went to the Pope, asked to resign. He's like, look, this is going to cause scandal, so I shouldn't be a priest anymore. Apparently, the old Pope was okay with it, though, and he's like, no, I want you to stay on. He didn't end up getting any kind of surgery to remove that, which was what the Switzerland thing was about. So now he's just a biological female who's, I guess, going to become Pope now. So he becomes Pope, and Cardinal Fiennes kind of stares out the window a couple of times with this very forlorn look on his face, and that's it. And that's Conclave. Now, you'll notice I'm wearing a different shirt. The lighting's a little different. I am recording this a couple of days after part 1, so bear with me on that one. So this movie has gotten a lot of press buzz in the months since it was released. A lot of people talking about how great this movie was, heaping praises upon it. It won a lot of awards at some of the recent award shows. It was nominated for many more. And then also, it's also gotten a lot of criticism for its subject matter. You have, of course, the twist ending. A lot of people were upset about that, saying, oh, this is a attempt to try to make the church seem woke, or try to call the church out for not being woke enough or something like that. Or it's making fun of Catholics or fun of the church. We'll kind of get into that because I want to nuance all of these takes a bit, because I thought I would hate this movie when I first heard about it, and first, of course, heard about the plot line. But having now watched it, I have to be honest, I did enjoy this movie. It's very well done, very well shot. The acting is superb by a lot of really great high-profile actors at their best. The cinematography, fantastic. If you like political thrillers, this is probably definitely a movie you would enjoy, putting aside some of the religious stuff, if that's something that might bother you. Of course, that being said, I do have several criticisms with this movie. One of the primary ones just being that it's very clear that this movie was made by a bunch of secular, more liberal-minded people. And I don't say that to disparage anyone who worked in this movie, or to say the director is a malicious actor, or any of the screenwriters are bad, or anything like that. I'm not saying this as a condemnation against anyone. I'm just trying to state a fact that it's clear that the people who are most involved in this movie just had a particular worldview. We all have particular worldviews, and the art that we make tends to reflect that worldview in one way or another. Sometimes it comes across better than others. But that being said, this is a movie about the Catholic Church, about some of the highest ranking men who run said church. And I don't believe that any of them believe in God in any way, shape, or form. Now, I know you'll be quick to point out, well, isn't that kind of the point, right? I mean, you have all of these ambitious men who really want this position, and none of them are really focused on what they should be focused about. Yeah, that's fair. I agree. And I think that part is done well. But when it comes to actually presenting that and wrestling with that idea as the movie plays itself out, I'm not convinced that the solutions that are presented are at all steeped in the gospel that you would expect coming from Catholics. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, for starters, the name of Jesus Christ is mentioned basically never in this movie. I think you might get a couple of Bible quotes from Cardinal Fiennes at a couple of points.
St. Paul said, "Be subject to one another out of reverence for Christ."
But ultimately, none of these men really make much reference to the Bible, to Old Testament, New Testament, to the tradition of the church, to writings of the saints, to former popes. So it just doesn't feel like these men actually exist in the Catholic world. Because again, even dealing with apathetic men who have lost sight of what they are, this is still the world that would have formed them, right? I mean, these are cardinals. So they didn't just join the church yesterday because somebody decided to opportunistically make them cardinals. These are men who have gone through years of formation, been priests for years, were then upgraded to the post of bishop for years, possibly archbishop in some cases, and then at some point bestowed the cardinal's hat upon them. Like, these are men who learned all of the things, even if they have since lost sight of that, who would still exist in that mindset in some way, shape, or form. You know, like, just think of how many politicians who try to get elected president of the United States who talk the talk of rah-rah America, even if they're kind of don't really care about it anymore. None of these men talk the talk rah-rah Catholic Church, except maybe Tedesco in his tradition thing.
Avremmo parlato tutti latino.
But none of the liberals do. They don't believe in any of that. So I'm just not convinced that any of these men hold any of that. I mean, like, even Cardinal Benitez, who is supposed to be the champion at the end of this movie, right? The one who finally gets elected Pope amidst all this bickering because he reminded everybody, yeah, this is what we should believe in. His vague speech about, you know, how we need to focus more on the internal instead of the external, which perfectly fair to say, hey, look, you're losing sight of the fact that we're all fallen sinners. We are all fallen sinners. That is a truth. But, you know, then, the church isn't the past. The church isn't tradition. The church is what we do in the future. God is outside of time, past, present, and future. So I don't agree with that at all. I don't think that that's Catholic at all. I mean, the church is as much, you know, has as much learned from the past. You know, the tradition is the great democracy of the dead, as G.K. Chesterton called it. You know, it's the gathering of all of the collective wisdom of all of the people who have come before us that we've now applied onto the present day. And yeah, sure, there's bad traditions or traditions of men, or, you know, traditions that, that was just good then, but it wasn't really an actual good that we should keep doing now. The Bible warns against those, but the traditions of the church, the holy tradition, that's the lifeblood, right? That's what gives us our identity for what we are. So, you know, if we're just going to kind of get rid of that, then all we're left with is another NGO, you know, another social outlet, another social organization to do vague progressive work all over the world. I mean, without the love of Jesus Christ and the teachings of Jesus Christ and the great biblical truths of who he is and the goodness of God and, you know, the infusion of the Holy Spirit which guides the church, without any of that theology and tradition, you're not going to have the nuns, the Mother Teresas, you know, who go to the fringes and try to care for the poor. You're not going to have the largest charitable organization on the planet, the Catholic Church. You're not going to have any of that without the gospel, because that's what drives us. That's what drives Christians forth to actually do any of these great services, you know, all these great acts of works with the poor that it would seem that people like a Cardinal Benitez think that we should be doing, right? I mean, without the truths of the gospel, how do we even understand the concept of we need to look to the internal and not be so focused on external? Like, they're both important, but the idea that, you know, right, like, it's not what goes into a man, you know, that defiles him, but it is what comes out of the heart, right? I mean, all the sin comes out of us, you know, it's part of our fallen nature. And without the grace of God, without the grace that comes through the sacraments of the Catholic Church, we are ill prepared to really be able to combat that, you know? So all of these kind of vague ideas that these, I guess, more progressive liberals in this movie, you know, the Cardinal Benitez's, the Cardinal Tucci's, what they want without that tradition you don't even have that, because that's where it all comes from. And I don't mean to let Tedesco off the hook or anything. I think that his view also is to be criticized. I mean, while he's the one sticking up for some sort of tradition, his idea of tradition is kind of a very closed off kind of, all right, so tradition goes until the year that I say that we stop there. Anything that comes past that, we don't count. Like, tradition is very much a living thing. You know, it all goes back into the Bible, into the teachings of the apostles, which goes back to the first century. So it's not like we're inventing new doctrine or something, but our understanding of that does develop over the course of, centuries, over the course of years. And, to reject the authority of a council, which the Second Vatican Council is technically never mentioned here, but it's very clear when they talk about all the work that's been done in the past 60 years, or we need to go back to the days of Latin or things like that. It's very clear that, he wants to kind of go back pre-Vatican II. And again, that is a very common point that a lot more radical traditionalists, let's say, or more hyper-traditionalists in the church, something they believe in, but you're running into the same pitfalls as now that you're locking the church down in a time, in one specific time, 60 plus years ago, and you're not allowing the development of doctrine to really flourish. You're not allowing the Holy Spirit to move the church where he wants to move the church. So both of these sides have a very erroneous view kind of the nature of Catholicism. And I think that, I think it's unfortunate to say, but I think that very much comes up because the people who made this movie, through no fault of their own, again, not saying that they were trying to do bad or anything, but I just think that based on where they're coming from, their ideas of what Catholicism is misses all these nuances that people who are really immersed in this world, who really live and understand this faith, know. If I guess that kind of makes sense. So again, that's kind of the biggest criticism that I really had in this movie, and I think that's where a lot of the frustrations and the people getting upset about this movie, I think that's where that's coming from. Is just not feeling like their faith is being accurately portrayed by this movie, which suddenly everybody's flocking to as an authority on what's happening in the Catholic Church right now. Now, another thing this movie did that bothered me a bit was the way that the seal of confession is treated. I made mention of this during the summary, and I just kind of want to bring it up again. So there's a scene, if you'll remember, where Cardinal Fiennes is trying to get some information from Sister Shinumi, trying to figure out, what her issue is with Cardinal Adeyemi. And she's really reluctant to talk about it. She doesn't want to talk about it. And finally, Cardinal Fiennes kind of is like,
would you like me to hear your confession?
And then it kind of cuts to the next scene. And, as soon as I saw that, I'm like, oh, I know exactly what they're about to do here. And I was not disappointed when we got to the next scene, and he reveals to Cardinal Adeyemi that he now knows about the affair that he had, way back when with this sister. And, kind of at the end of that, Cardinal Fiennes says,
Shinumi will say nothing to protect her son, and I am bound by the vows of the confessional.
And then, that is that. But the entertaining thing about that is he's already broken the seal of confession by bringing this up at all or using this information at all. So it's kind of irrelevant, and he has automatically excommunicated himself. You might not realize how serious the church treats the seal of confession, but any priest who breaks that is automatically excommunicated from the church, which means they are out until they can, be officially repent and be brought back in. So excommunication is like the worst thing that can be leveled against somebody in the church. It's you have seriously done something to break communion with the body of Christ, and in order to be brought back in, you need to make reparation for that. And, just to kind of read a couple of passages from the Code of Canon Law kind of describing the seal of confession. So Canon 983 says, the sacramental seal is inviolable. Therefore, it is absolutely forbidden for a confessor to betray in any way a penitent in words or in any manner for any reason. The interpreter, if there is one, and all others who in any way have knowledge of sins from confession are also obliged to observe secrecy. And then Canon 984 goes on. A confessor is prohibited completely from using knowledge acquired from confession to the detriment of the penitent, even when any danger of revelation is excluded. A person who has been placed in authority cannot use in any manner for external governance the knowledge about sins which he received in confession at any time. So you can see right here from the canon law of the church how serious this is treated. If anyone, even if you're not a priest and you happen to overhear somebody's confession, you are bound by that seal, and you risk excommunication, if you do not abide by that. Even if you're an interpreter, if you go to confession and the priest doesn't speak the same language as you, you're allowed to have an interpreter. You technically don't need to. Even if the priest doesn't speak the same language, you can still confess in your native language, and he can give you absolution. It's, of course, God that ultimately absolves you, and God knows all languages, of course. So it doesn't really matter what the priest can or cannot speak, as long as God's grace is able to work through him in that way. But you're allowed to have an interpreter if you want. So if you choose to do that, that interpreter is also now bound by this seal. So again, this is a very serious matter. And, it's one of those things that just like, if they had Googled this for 5 seconds, they would have realized that wouldn't have worked. But it just makes it's just a little thing that makes it even less believable as, an accurate movie about the Catholic Church. Now, one final thing that bugged me, since I'm just kind of going here. One final thing that bugged me, and this one got me a little more upset, so I might get a little more emotional with this. I apologize in advance.
I don't want to calm down. Don't tell me to calm down.
But there's a scene later in the movie when you have Cardinal Fiennes, Cardinal Tucci, and the other liberal cardinal whose name I can't remember. They're kind of all standing in this dark stairwell after, one of the days, and they're trying to figure out what they do, because it's clear that Tremblay is the only man who can stand up to Tedesco at this point. So this is, before the revelations about him come to light, and they're really wrestling with, all right, so I guess we're just going to have to rally around him. Cardinal Fiennes is like, I just really don't trust him. But, the other archbishop, the other cardinal who's there, finally kind of comes out and says, look.
We had a pope who was in the Hitler Youth and fought for the Nazis. We had popes accused of colluding with communists and fascists. We had popes who have ignored reports of most appalling sexual abuse of children.
Okay, shh.
When it comes to the child sexual abuse, that's a reference to Pope John Paul II. There's reports that some of the abuse that was happening in America around that time was brought to his attention. However, he discounted some of those reports. That's to his great shame that happened. I think he would be the first to admit that he really screwed up with that. So that's fair to bring that up. The bit about the popes conspiring with communists and fascists, I'm not really sure specifically who that's referring to. Maybe that's referring to Pius XII and kind of like allegations that during the war, he wasn't as hard on the Nazis as he should have been. He was more worried about communism than fascism, so he may have been a little more lenient or something like that. That's something that people have debated about a lot. I think that a lot of those claims are baseless and a lot of those are myths. Again, that's also not really something that I think is a huge issue, but the one thing that did bug me that I do think is a bit more of an issue is the claim about popes who have, or a pope who has been part of the Hitler Youth and has served in the German army. That is undoubtedly a reference to Pope Benedict XVI. When he was a child, Joseph Ratzinger when he was 14, he was part of the Hitler Youth. Now, the tricky thing about that is that he was part of the compulsory part of the Hitler Youth. So all 14-year-olds at that point in 1941 were required to join the Hitler Youth, right? This is the party, and if you're not lining up with the party, then you're not a good German or something like that. So he was forced into it, just like all the other children that he knew. And if you know anything about the Ratzinger family, his father was actually a staunch anti-Nazi. He would get harassed a lot because he did not agree with the Nazi regime. So, of course, Pope Benedict, being part of this family, Joseph Ratzinger, he also wasn't a fan of the Nazis, and he only enrolled because he was forced to, and he tried to avoid all the meetings he could, and then eventually in 1943, while he was in seminary, he was drafted into the army. He served in an AA division for a while, but as soon as the front line started to break down, he deserted from his unit and, returned home, spent some time in an Allied prison camp when the Allies kind of took over that part of Germany, and, again, was eventually released and able to continue his studies as a priest. But the fact that this movie just kind of threw out there, like, oh yeah, we've had Nazi popes before, it just frustrates me, because if you did a quick Google search, you'd very quickly just be able to figure out that none of that is true. And that's all rumor that's kind of cropped up over the years. But he didn't want to be there. He was just there because he was forced to. So to throw that out there as an example of a bad pope, that Nazi guy, that's just a needless statement of really calumny against Pope Benedict's legacy. I mean, he was a holy man, this great humble man. We talked about his wrestling with he wanted to resign, but he wasn't allowed to resign, and eventually he became pope, even though he didn't want to be pope. Like, he's a very humble guy, very holy guy, and he abhorred everything that, like, the Nazis stood for. His family did too. So, to just kind of throw that out there that, oh, he's one of those bad popes because he was with the Nazis, like, that's just such an easily debunkable thing. Like, they could have mentioned anybody in this scene. They didn't even have to mention recent popes. Like, it probably would have been less controversial if they're like, oh, we've had popes who dug up their predecessor and put them on trial. Yes, that actually happened. Google Pope Stephen VI, reigned for a year, put his predecessor's body on trial, convicted him of heresy, had the body thrown in the Tiber, and then Stephen VI was killed within a year because everyone hated him for that. We've had popes who became pope at age 20, was overthrown like 3 times, but kept coming back, and then, is said to have sold the papacy. Talk about simony. We've had the infamous period of the 10th century known as the pornocracy of the papacy. We've had the Renaissance popes, Rodrigo Borgia, Alexander VI, we've had very sinful, awful men who have been pope. Like, Catholics aren't, like, unaware of this. So to throw that out there, that'd be a fair point to make in the scene. But to use Pope Benedict, who all of those claims are just untrue and just blown out of proportion, that just really bothers me because I have a lot of respect for him, so just to see them kind of not even bother to look into it and just throw that into the movie that now everybody's seeing and now they're all gonna believe these things, I think that's just so dishonest. So yeah, I guess I've kind of said my piece on kind of what frustrated me about this movie, but I don't want to end it on that. I want to close on a bit of a higher note. The things that I did enjoy about this movie, like I said, I do think that this was a very engaging movie, very thrilling movie. The characters, although they are caricatured as we've described, do feel authentic for what the movie was trying to do. Tucci's a pain in the rear end. I cannot stand his character. He's apathetic. He's ruthless. Tedesco, also ruthless. He's arrogant. He's a very fun antagonist in that you just kind of love to hate him. You have Tremblay, who's just a milquetoast Canadian moderate who is just kind of there and you just don't like him, but John Lithgow plays him very well. There's been a lot of talk about, like, oh, they're focusing so much on how bad conservatives are and the liberals are all great. Honestly, like, again, I've said my piece about what I think about the way they portray different groups, but, like, honestly, yeah, the conservative guy is obviously the bad guy, but, like, honestly, the liberals here are kind of suck too. Like, Tucci doesn't give a shit about any political positions. He just cares that he's not Tedesco. Like Tucci really doesn't believe in anything.
Jefferson has beliefs, Burr has none.
Like, I think this was just as excoriating about how apathetic and just kind of ruthless liberals can be as compared to how bad conservatives can also be. So I think that they did that actually kind of well. And again, the character I think that they did the best was probably good old Cardinal Fiennes. His character arc is kind of like this cardinal who had great faith and lost his faith and is trying to reacquire it. I find that really relatable. And, like, he seems to be the one who really believes the most out of any of them. He's fumbling to really understand what that means, but it's very clear that, like, he sees the ideal and he realizes he can't live up to that ideal, but he really wants to, like he wants to believe in God. He wants the church to be right because the church should be better than it is.
We have to do better than we're doing, and we have to do it faster.
And all this politicking is really getting away from the truth. So he has a very keen sense of that, and I think it's just relatable the way he's trying to work through this and trying to combat all of this corruption. Like, I just really appreciate that. Like, he does get down and pray. He has trouble praying, but he tries. After Cardinal Adeyemi kind of loses his position, there's that one scene where he sits down with him on his bed while Cardinal Adeyemi is just crying because he realizes he really wants to be pope, but he can't be pope.
Will you pray with me?
Yes, of course.
And Cardinal Fiennes just kind of prays with him. And I just found that a very heartwarming scene, just a very genuine scene. And I think in many ways, despite, the fact that he breached the seal of confession, I think that he does exemplify a lot of the best of what Christianity should be, even though he doesn't even realize it. And far be it from me to say what should or should not, how the movie should or should not have ended, but I think it really would have gone, like, felt more genuine and been a much better of a conclusion if he was the one who won the papacy in the end. You know, like maybe it didn't rekindle his faith. Maybe he's still kind of unsure about himself, but you know, just maybe a moment where he can kind of look up at the light and just kind of be like, okay, you know, that's kind of where you're going with this, God. You know, maybe there's something here that I didn't realize about myself. I didn't realize about the way that I didn't realize about your plan here, you know, and just kind of have that bit of hope thrown in there, because the ending was weird, and I'm not really sure what it was any of that was supposed to mean. Like, it just seems as empty as the beginning was. I don't see any hope, you know, for the future. I guess, you know, Cardinal Pope Innocent now, I guess, is supposed to be the hope. But I just felt like if Cardinal Fiennes kind of came in at the end and was elected, I feel like that kind of would have wrapped this movie up a lot nicer. But again, far be it from me to tell another writer how to do their story, because, you know, the Lord knows that I probably wouldn't be able to do it any better. But anyway, I've kind of gone on long here. I said this wasn't going to be a long video, and yet here we are. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you agree with me, if you disagree with me, I'd love to hear it. I'd love to interact with that. You know, if you like what we're doing here, feel free to like, subscribe to the channel. I guess hit that little bell notification so you get notified. We got a lot of stuff that we got going on here. We're kind of rebranding the channel a bit in that we're kind of under a new umbrella. We're under Little Flower Media, which is our media enterprise that me and a couple of friends of mine have started. We also have a podcast that we do known as The Things That Don't Change. You know, if you like us talking about religion, sometimes about culture, about movies, about shows, about stories, at least those are the things I like to talk about while I'm on there, or just about the unchanging truths of faith and how that intersects with our modern culture. And if you're just curious, like, you know, we invite you to check it out. You can find us at Locals, actually, at tttdc.locals.com. That's TTDC.locals.com. We invite you to come there and engage in Saints of the Week. We have morning prayer. We have some other videos that we kind of throw up there. So take a gander by there if you're interested. Thank you all so very much for watching. I hope to be back here soon with my next video. Trying to be a little more consistent here.
His plan gets worse all the time.
Just hope he doesn't change it again.
I'm standing right here.
We know.
But until next time, God bless.